There are two games that frequently get cited in discussions around mental health in video games as exemplary titles that cover the subject expertly. One of them, Celeste, is a game that I made a video about last year, where I talked about how my own personal journey was reflected in the game's story. But the other major flag flyer for mental health was a game that I hadn't yet played at the time. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice released in 2017 as Ninja Theory wanted to test the waters of making a AAA quality game on an indie budget. They also chose to make a story about a protagonist with psychosis to explore something that games rarely do. This was a decision that could have led to some embarrassing results if they weren't careful, and Ninja Theory are kind of experts on questionable writing, I'm just saying.
I don't know my mother, but if you're calling me a son of a bitch, you wouldn't be the first!
But fortunately they were careful, consulting with psychologists and actual psychosis patients undergoing treatment in an attempt to present a sympathetic representation of the disorder. And they were seemingly successful based on the praise they received upon launch, with game critics and audiences alike praising it for its portrayal of a much misunderstood disorder. But is it any good? That's the question, isn't it? After languishing in my PS4 library for quite possibly years, I finally stepped up and played it at last. And how do I feel about it, both as a game and as someone who suffered from mental illness, as a portrayal of a tough subject?
I will tell you my stories of hell.
Hellblade plays its hand early, opening in a way that instantly sets the tone and displays what the team were capable of. Some spooky voice acting presented through binaural audio, a strange world emerging out of the fog, an instantly intriguing premise, and facial animations on the protagonist that instantly make you wonder just how this was done on a smaller budget. The presentation in Hellblade is excellent. Every single step of the way there is love and attention applied to every aspect of the game's visuals, sound and world design. We see a lot of protagonist Senua's face, lovingly rendered specifically so that we can feel every emotion expressed in it. This attention to detail in the visuals shows up in various other places too. Senua will often see visions of things around her as a result of her psychosis, and the way the game presents these visions to us is impressive. Whether it's runes presented like they're complex lens flares flickering at the edge of our vision, or people from Senua's past showing up as live action footage superimposed effortlessly with the in-game models. Every part of the visual design had me stunned at just how good it was. There's an almost dreamlike quality to everything, like you're not sure what's real and what's imagined. It can be disorienting, it can be terrifying, and it can be helpful, but no matter what, it always catches your eye. Much like the hallucinations experienced by real psychosis patients. This isn't the only way that Senua's psychosis is represented through the game's design, however. The audio does this too, most notably through voices swirling in and out of the audio soundscape.
Broke. The gate is open.
Some of these voices are helpful, some are discouraging, and others are terrifying, while two dominant voices represent Senua's memories and stories of history and legend, delivered by a soft-spoken Englishwoman and a brash Scotsman respectively. And all of these myriad voice performances are stellar. Both the main narrators allow us to trust them, with the female narrator's soft, gentle sadness tugging at our heartstrings.
It's like crossing into another world that looks the same but feels different.
And the male narrator's commanding tone making us invested in the stories of Vikings and gods.
However you come to the gold-covered bridge that leads to hell, you may find it guarded by a giantess.
But that's just the presentation. How's the gameplay? Well, it's also excellent, as you could probably imagine, since we're still in the good section. The game is kind of a combat action game crossed with a puzzle game, wrapped in a loose horror package. A lot of the game is wandering around, solving the riddles of the world around Senua, whether that's aligning runes with their corresponding shapes in the world, or using illusory doors to open paths that weren't there before. These puzzles enhance the feeling of disorientation, placing us into Senua's shoes and allowing us to see the world through her tormented eyes. Every pattern in the scenery that reveals itself to us, every shift in reality, every bit of darkness hiding an unknowable terror, all of it presents us with a vision into Senua's mind and makes us question our own sanity. And the combat adds to this. It's fairly simple but functional in every way that it needs to be. It's mostly dodging and using light and heavy attacks with some focus powers thrown in for good measure, but it serves its purpose with the atmosphere of the fights feeling very much panicked, and there's a real tension to the battles. This is especially true when combined with the voices in Senua's head, the voices that warn her of incoming attacks that operate entirely as your indicator of where enemies are. This decision to make these sudden calls your warning instead of a marker on screen or something helps to immerse you in the situation so much more effectively. Senua's Sacrifice is a masterwork in presentation, with every element working in harmony to tell a compelling narrative. I will level with you though, the limited budget of the game has meant that what is a superb package does hide what is quite a limited game in reality. Like I said, the combat is fairly simplistic and sometimes it can get a little repetitive as you duck and weave through identical combat encounters over and over again. These encounters can also get frustrating as more enemies are added to the mix. The close quarters nature of combat is a great creative decision designed to enhance the claustrophobia of feeling trapped in your mental illness. Except when there are a lot of enemies, because my god does that closeness become an annoyance. As you lose a lot of situational awareness and the persistent lock-on makes it harder to move away into a more advantageous position at times. But beyond that, the game really is mostly just walking and listening to people talk, and if the presentation hadn't been top-notch, this could have been fairly tedious. It's held together by all the great writing and visuals, but it's hard to shake the feeling that there could be a little bit more to this. This is especially obvious in large open areas where you can wander around and explore, but there's rarely ever anything to find beyond an occasional lore stone. Which is a shame because I feel something more could have been tucked away off the beaten path. But these are minor gripes, and addressing them could have either ballooned the budget beyond what Ninja Theory were capable of prior to their Microsoft purchase, or could have detracted from the story that the team wanted to tell.
I will tell you my stories of hell.
Definitely. The small nitpicks aside, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is an amazing experience, one that takes a taboo subject and puts it front and centre, forcing the player to see through the eyes of someone with a mental illness. Watching the behind the scenes featurette included with the game emphasised the excellence of this story further. Seeing actual psychosis patients describe how important it was to see their experiences depicted in a piece of media was heartwarming.
It was just fantastic to get the opportunity to use our lived experience in a very creative way. There's nothing tokenistic about the work we've put in. It feels like we've been listened to, things have been taken on board, and I think there was a lot of realism in the game itself.
But it's not really something that was at all surprising before seeing those interviews, as the game itself showed me that already. I don't have psychosis. I've discussed this in my Celeste video, but many of my mental health issues stem from social anxiety, a fear of harsh judgment, and struggles with confrontation, and the depression and low self-esteem that those issues end up creating. But while I don't identify with Hellblade's depiction of hallucinations and voices directly, every single time a spooky voice would whisper about how useless and incapable Senua was, or how she was guaranteed to fail at everything, I felt a gut punch, flashing back to hearing similar thoughts in my own voice in my own head in my worst moments. Hellblade does not hold back from its depictions of the harsh realities of suffering from mental illness. Right out of the gate, we learn of Senua being afraid of the darkness, a malevolent force that threatens to creep up through her arm and gnaw at her brain and her soul. We're even granted a fake-out instruction that says if we fail too many times, the game has permadeath, something that caused some minor uproar when it turned out to be just an illusion. However, this instruction serves a narrative purpose. The notion of pushing against illusions is one that takes up an entire chapter not long after this, and Senua already hears voices, including apparently a narrator who describes what she's doing as if it's a past event being talked around a campfire. The game already makes it clear that we're not necessarily supposed to trust anything we see or hear. Instead, this is yet another lie that Senua's mind tells her, that if she fails too much, then she will never succeed, that the darkness will win out eventually, and it's just a matter of time. And as someone who has told myself that lie far too many times, I applauded this fake out as yet another example of the game's depiction of mental illness. Even the soft-spoken narrator spends time early on describing what's going on in Senua's mind, and so much of it was relatable.
We picture fear, and we think of a shadow in the woods, a creature in the night. If only it were that simple. The worst kind comes without warning, a deep and primal signal from within. Because when darkness speaks, it changes everything, turning home into a foreign land and loved ones into strangers. Exile makes sense when you realize that you were never really home in the first place. When the illusion of self is shattered, you simply cease to be, though it may not seem that way to others. You know when it is true. You can feel it. A stranger in your own body. An imposter. And nothing is the same ever again. Looking back, I was so naive to think she could banish it on her own. The further she saw into the darkness, the more she struggled to see anything at all.
This is all countered by Druth, who presents these arguments to her.
Hell will not give you the answers you want. But you mustn't look away from the horrors it does offer. Because you cannot overcome suffering if you refuse to look at it. You say your world has collapsed. Good. Let it collapse, and have the courage to shed your tears. Raise your world and cry!
My world is dead.
Only then, as with a newborn, will you see the world anew.
I recognised all of this. The darkness was personified as a real thing, something to be directly combated, and hearing all of this resonated with me. The encroaching darkness, threatening to strike at any moment when your guard is down, and eating away at you is something that I have experienced. The talk of feeling like it's killed you or planning to kill you, even if in just a metaphorical sense by wiping your identity, it's all familiar to me. Watching the psychosis patients describe how the game made them feel, listened to, and recognised is something that I also feel. Because Hellblade nails how mental illness makes you feel. Every aspect of the game is cultivated in a specific way to make you feel uncomfortable, unwelcome, and under constant threat. And while the game may be limited in its interactivity, the empathy generated through the story feels like it could only ever be possible with an interactive medium. It uses just enough interactivity to put you in Senua's shoes and recognise the trauma she's going through in a way that other mediums might struggle to do. Hellblade lives up to the hype because Ninja Theory pushed to tell a story about mental health that was sympathetic and powerful and did not compromise in that vision. I am so glad that I played this, and I would urge anyone else who is late to the party to do the same. This game is important, and we need a lot more of this. Thank you for watching, everyone. I know things got a little bit heavy today, as was probably to be expected considering Hellblade's subject matter, but I hope you enjoyed the video all the same. As always, please like and subscribe, and I would also urge you to check out some of my other videos such as these if you haven't already. I'd also like to say thank you to my patrons who can be seen on screen right now. Their support is truly appreciated, and if you would like to join them, that would be truly appreciated too. Stay tuned for more like this, and I will see you again very soon.